The wind on the 31st of December whips my hair as I stand on the balcony of my Chicago skyloft. My phone buzzes with Dad's text saying it is just Lydia and the boy this year. I type a single word. Okay. He has no idea I own this entire building. Years ago, he told me to keep quiet if I wanted a roof over my head. So, I built one where I never have to be silent again. My name is Madeline Lynn, and if you looked at me from the street level of downtown Chicago right now, I would be nothing more than a speck of dust against the glowing glass of the skyline. But up here, on the 42nd floor of the Axis Tower, I am the storm that is about to break. The wind off Lake Michigan on the 31st of December does not just blow, it bites. It tears at the exposed skin with the ferocity of a wild animal. But I do not step back inside. I stand right at the edge of the glass railing, my fingers curled tight around the stem of a crystal champagne flute. Below me, the city is a grid of electric veins, pulsing with gold and neon. Thousands of people are gathering down there, huddled in coats and scarves, waiting for the countdown, waiting for the fireworks, waiting for the promise that a new year brings something different. I am not waiting. I am done waiting. My phone vibrates against the marble surface of the balcony table behind me. The sound is a harsh, mechanical buzz that cuts through the howling wind. I know who it is before I even turn around. It is 11:45 at night. There is only one person in my life who waits until the absolute final moment to deliver disappointment, treating it like a strategic strike. I pick up the device. The screen lights up my face, probably casting a ghostly blue pallor over my skin. The message is from Dad. New Year this year is just going to be the house, Lydia, and the boy. We want to keep it intimate. Do not come over and complicate things. We will see you some other time. I stare at the words. He still calls Brandon the boy, even though Brandon is 22 years old and driving a car paid for by the college fund that was supposed to be mine. And he still assumes I was planning to come over. He assumes I'm sitting in some dark, cramped apartment, dressed in my coat, holding a store-bought fruitcake, just waiting for his permission to drive 2 hours back to the suburbs to sit on a plastic folding chair at the children's table. I do not feel anger. That is the strange thing. 10 years ago, this text would have made me cry. 5 years ago, it would have made me scream into a pillow. Tonight, it just makes me feel a cold, sharp clarity, like the ice forming on the edge of the railing. I type back a single word. Okay. I hit send. No emoji, no punctuation, no passive-aggressive follow-up asking why. Just okay. I slip the phone into the pocket of my silk dress and take a sip of the champagne. It is a 1996 vintage, crisp and unapologetically expensive. It tastes like victory. The text message, however, acts like a key turning in a rusty lock, opening a door I usually keep shut. A memory forces its way out, overlaying the Chicago skyline with the dim, yellowed wallpaper of the hallway in Maple Ridge, Ohio. I am 18 years old again. The air smells of potpourri and stale tension. I am standing in the living room, clutching a backpack to my chest. Lydia is there. Her face is twisted in that special kind of ugly that only reveals itself when no neighbors are watching. She is screaming about ungratefulness, about how I take up space, about how my very existence is a drain on her resources. I remember the sound of tearing paper. It was my portfolio. Sketches, grades, the few awards I had managed to hide from her. She ripped them in half, then in quarters, letting the confetti rain down onto the beige carpet. When I stepped forward to stop her, her hand lashed out. The slap was loud, a crack that echoed in the silence of the house. My cheek burned, but the pain was secondary to the shock. I looked at my father, Thomas Lynn. He was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee. He saw it all. He saw the torn papers. He saw the red mark blooming on my face. He saw the tears welling in my eyes. I waited for him to step in. I waited for him to be the father he was in the blurry photos from before Mom died. He took a sip of his coffee, looked me dead in the eye, and delivered the sentence that would become the foundation of my entire adult life. "Keep quiet if you want to stay here, Madeline." That was it. No defense, no comfort, just a transaction. My silence was the rent I had to pay for a roof over my head. If I wanted to exist in his world, I had to be a ghost. I had to shrink until I was small enough not to bother Lydia, small enough not to threaten Brandon's spotlight, small enough to be invisible. The wind gusts harder, snapping me back to the present. I inhaled deeply, letting the freezing air fill my lungs. I kept quiet. "Dad," I whispered to the empty air. I kept quiet for a long time. He thinks I am still that girl. He thinks I am working some mid-level administrative job, living paycheck to paycheck, desperate for his approval. When we speak, which is rare, I keep the conversations vague. I tell him work is fine. I tell him I am getting by. I let him believe the narrative that comforts him, the one where I am the struggling daughter who couldn't quite make it without his help, and Brandon is the golden child destined for greatness. He has absolutely no idea that I am standing on the balcony of the penthouse of the Axis Tower. He has no idea that I own the penthouse. He has no idea that my holding company, Silverline, owns the entire building. This skyloft, with its 20-foot ceilings, heated floors, and 360-degree view of the city, was purchased with cash 2 years ago. The tenant list of this building includes professional athletes and CEOs. The equity in this property alone is worth more than the entire town of Maple Ridge. But to Thomas and Lydia, I am just Madeline, the one who needs to be told not to complicate things. I turn away from the view and walk back inside. The glass doors slide shut with a heavy, satisfying thunk, cutting off the noise of the wind instantly. The silence inside is heavy, but it is not the oppressive silence of my childhood home. This is the silence of power. It is the silence of a library or a vault. The main living area is glowing with the light of 100 candles. I did not hire a party planner. I did not want strangers touching this night. I arranged the flowers myself, white orchids and winter branches, stark and elegant. In the center of the room is a long dining table made of reclaimed walnut, polished until it looks like dark water. There are 12 chairs. Dad said it is just Lydia and Brandon tonight. He thinks he is excluding me. He thinks he is punishing me by leaving me out of the family celebration. He does not realize that I have already stolen the family. I walk over to the table and run my hand along the back of the first chair. This seat is for Aunt Caroline. Lydia banned her from Thanksgiving 7 years ago because Caroline made a comment about Brandon's grades. Caroline has spent every holiday since then eating takeout alone in her condo. The next seat is for my cousin Noah. He was kicked out of the family circle when he decided to go to art school instead of business school like Lydia wanted. And the seat at the head of the table, the place of honor, that is for Grandma Eleanor, my father's own mother. Lydia slowly pushed her out, claiming she was too difficult to transport, too confused to enjoy the parties. They put her in a home and visited her twice a year. Dad let it happen because it was easier than fighting Lydia. I sent a car for Grandma Eleanor 3 hours ago, a private medical transport with a nurse, fully paid for, to bring her here in comfort. I sent cars for everyone. Tonight is not just a party, it is a reconstruction. For years, I watched from the sidelines. I watched through the window of that old house as they laughed and toasted, while I was told to stay in my room or do the dishes. I watched as they curated their perfect image for social media, cropping me out of the frame. I internalized the message that I was unwanted, that I was broken, that I did not have a seat at the table. But then I realized something. If you cannot get a seat at the table, you do not beg. You do not stand in the corner waiting for scraps. You go out. You cut down the tree. You sand the wood. And you build your own damn table. And you make it bigger, stronger, and more beautiful than anything they could ever imagine. I check my watch. It is 11:55 at night. The guests will be coming up the private elevator any minute now. The chef I hired from Riverlight Kitchen is already prepping the hors d'oeuvres in the back. The champagne is chilled. My phone buzzes again. Another text from Dad. Did you get my text? Please just confirm so I do not have to worry about a scene. I look at the screen and smile. It is not a nice smile. It is the smile of someone who has held a winning poker hand for 10 years and is finally about to lay the cards down on the felt. I do not reply this time. I do not need to. The elevator chimes, a soft, melodic sound that signals the arrival of the people who were told they were not good enough. I smooth down the front of my dress. I am not the girl in the hallway anymore. I am not the victim. I am the architect. I walk towards the elevator doors as they slide open. I can hear the murmur of voices, the hesitation. They do not know what to expect. All they know is that Madeline invited them. They probably expect a small apartment, maybe some pizza. They are prepared to be polite, to share in our collective exclusion. They are not prepared for this. Aunt Caroline steps out first. Her eyes go wide, reflecting the lights of the city behind me. She stops dead in her tracks, her hand flying to her mouth. Behind her, Noah steps out, looking around in disbelief, and then the wheelchair comes through, pushing Grandma Eleanor into the light. Grandma looks frail, her skin like parchment paper, but her eyes are sharp. She looks at the ceiling, at the glass walls, at the expansive luxury that surrounds us. Then she looks at me. "Madeline?" she asks, her voice trembling slightly. "Welcome home, Grandma," I say softly. I guide them in. I take their coats. I put champagne in their hands. I watch as the shock turns into wonder, and then into a warm, glowing realization. They are not the outcasts tonight. They are the VIPs. Below us, the city begins the final count. 10, 9, 8. I think of Dad and Lydia sitting in their living room in Maple Ridge. They are probably watching the ball drop on television, feeling smug and secure in their small, controlled kingdom. They think they have won because they successfully kept me away. They think their silence is the law. 7, 6, 5. They have no idea that tomorrow morning, everything changes. They have no idea that the boy they worship is going to see photos of this night and realize he is sitting in the cheap seats. They have no idea that the narrative they have spun for 20 years, that I am the failure, the burden, is about to be shattered by the undeniable reality of my success. 4, 3, 2. I raise my glass to the room, to the family I chose, to the family that was thrown away. "Happy New Year," I whisper. 1. Fireworks explode outside the glass, painting the room in bursts of red, gold, and violet. The sound is muffled, a distant thudding against the reinforced windows, but the light is blinding. I look at my reflection in the glass. I see a woman who survived. I see a woman who took the bricks they threw at her and built a fortress. Dad told me to keep quiet if I wanted to stay. He was right about one thing. You have to be quiet when you are building an empire. You work in the shadows. You grind when they are sleeping. You suffer in silence. But once the building is finished, once you own the roof, you never have to be quiet again. I turn my back on the city and face my guests. The party has officially begun. So guys, I have to ask you, the one listening to this story right now, when the people who are supposed to love you tell you that you are too much, that you are difficult, that you need to shrink yourself to fit into their world, what will you do? Will you make yourself small? Will you accept the scraps they throw under the table? Will you apologize for existing? Or will you do what I did? Will you take that silence, wrap it around you like a coat, walk out into the cold, and build a balcony so high that they have to crane their necks just to see the bottom of your shoes? The choice is yours, but let me tell you, the view from up here, it is worth every single second of the climb. To understand how a woman ends up standing on a balcony worth millions in Chicago, completely alone and perfectly content, you have to understand where she started. You have to understand Maple Ridge, Ohio. It is a small town, the kind that looks charming on a postcard, but feels like a tomb when you actually live there. In my memory, it is always winter in Maple Ridge. The snow was not the glittering, magical dust you see in movies. It was heavy, wet, and gray. It piled up on the sides of the roads like dirty concrete, trapping us in. The skyline was dominated by the old brick steeple of the First Methodist Church, a finger pointing judgmentally at the sky, reminding everyone that God was watching, and so were the neighbors. My mother died when I was 7 years old. Her memory is soft and blurry, like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. I remember her smell, vanilla and dried lavender, and the way she used to hum in the kitchen. When she passed, the music stopped in our house. My father, Thomas Lynn, was not a bad man then. He was just a hollow one. He did not know how to be a father without a wife to tell him what to do. He was a hardware store owner who understood nuts, bolts, and inventory sheets better than he understood the grief of a 7-year-old girl. 2 years later, he tried to fill the silence with Lydia. Lydia appeared in our lives like a sudden cold front. To the town of Maple Ridge, she was perfect. She baked casseroles for the sick. She organized the church charity drive. She wore crisp, ironed blouses and always had her hair set in stiff, golden waves that never moved, even in the wind. She smiled at the cashier at the grocery store. She waved to the mailman. She was the picture of the dutiful, loving stepmother stepping in to save a broken family. But the moment the front door clicked shut and the deadbolt slid into place, the smile vanished. It was like watching a mask slide off a mannequin. She did not come alone. She brought Brandon. Brandon was her son from a previous marriage, a boy 2 years younger than me with cheeks that were always rosy and eyes that knew exactly how to widen to get what they wanted. If Lydia was the queen of our new dysfunctional kingdom, Brandon was the crown prince. From the very beginning, the lines were drawn. Though I was too young to see them clearly, I thought we were blending a family. I thought I was getting a brother and a mother. I did not realize I was actually getting a supervisor and a replacement. My role in the house shifted subtly at first. Then all at once, it started with small things. Lydia would say she was too tired to do the dishes after cooking the dinner that the neighbors praised her for. So I would pull the stool up to the sink and scrub. Then it was the laundry. Then it was dusting the baseboards. By the time I was 12, I was essentially the live-in housekeeper. While Brandon was outside playing baseball or sitting in the living room playing video games, I was learning the difference between bleach and fabric softener. "It is good practice for you, Madeline," Lydia would say, her voice sugary sweet, but her eyes cold and flat. "A girl needs to know how to keep a home. It is the only way you will be useful to a husband someday." Useful. That was the word that defined my existence. I was not loved. I was useful. My father owned Lynn's Hardware, a staple on Main Street. As I got older, my utility extended to the business, after school, while Brandon went to tutors or sports practice. I went to the store. I swept the floors. I stocked heavy boxes of nails and screws until my fingers were gray with metal dust. I learned to cut keys and mix paint. I remember one afternoon when I was 14, I was struggling to lift a 50-pound bag of rock salt for a customer. My father was at the counter, going over ledgers. "Dad?" I gasped, the weight straining my back. He looked up, distracted. "Just drag it, Madeline. You are strong enough." 10 minutes later, Brandon came into the store. He complained that his backpack was too heavy because he had 3 textbooks in it. My father immediately left the counter, took the bag from his shoulder, and carried it to the car for him, asking if he wanted to stop for ice cream on the way home. I stood there, wiping rock salt dust off my jeans, and felt a small, hard stone form in the center of my chest. It was the realization that in the economy of my father's heart, I was the currency he traded to keep Lydia happy. The holidays were where the disparity became a spectator sport. Christmas mornings were a choreographed exercise in humiliation. We would sit by the tree, the one Lydia decorated perfectly with matching silver and blue ornaments. My old handmade ornaments from Mom were lost in the attic years ago. Brandon's pile of gifts was always substantial. Brand new gaming consoles, designer sneakers, a new bicycle. He would tear through the paper, squealing, while Lydia beamed at him, clapping her hands. Then it would be my turn. I would reach for the small, flat packages labeled Madeline. One year, it was a set of flannel sheets. "For your bed," Lydia said. The old ones were looking dingy. Another year, It was a generic grooming kit with a hairbrush and a mirror. When I was 16, Brandon got a used car. It was a Honda Civic, not new, but shiny and red with a big bow on top. I sat there on the living room rug, holding my gift, a graphing calculator for my math class, and a pack of high-quality socks. "Education is important," my father mumbled, unable to meet my eyes. "And those socks are wool," Lydia added, sipping her coffee. "They are expensive. You keep complaining about your feet being cold in the store." I looked at the car keys in Brandon's hand, then at the socks in mine. I did not cry. I think I had forgotten how to cry by then. I just nodded and said, "Thank you." But the memory that burns the hottest, the one that makes the champagne on my Chicago balcony taste so sweet tonight, happened when I was 17. It was New Year's Eve. Usually, we stayed home, but that year, the town of Maple Ridge was hosting a grand gala at the local country club. It was a black tie event, tickets costing $100 a plate. It was the social event of the decade for our small town. For weeks, the house was buzzing. Lydia bought a sequined gown in emerald green. Dad bought a new tuxedo. Even Brandon got a rented suit. I assumed, foolishly, that we were all going. I had even looked at a dress at the thrift store, a modest black thing that I could afford with my wages from the hardware store. On the afternoon of the 31st of December, I came downstairs. Lydia was in the kitchen, applying a face mask. "What time should I start getting ready?" I asked. Lydia paused, her hand hovering near her cheek. She turned to me, her face green with the clay mask, looking like a swamp creature. "Ready for what?" she asked. "The gala," I said, my voice shrinking. She laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound, like a twig snapping. "Oh, honey, tickets were very limited and expensive. Besides, we can't leave the house empty on New Year's Eve. It is not safe. There are drunk drivers, vandals. Someone needs to stay here and watch the property." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You want me to stay here? Alone? While you all go to a party?" "It is not a party. It is a networking event for your father," she lied smoothly. "Brandon is going because he needs to learn how to socialize with important people. Well, you are better at the domestic side of things. You are so responsible. Madeline, we trust you." I looked at my father, who was sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper. He had heard every word. "Dad?" I asked. It was a plea. He turned a page, the paper rustling loudly in the quiet kitchen. "Lydia is right. Maddie, we need someone to keep an eye on things. It is just one night. You can watch the special on TV." He did not look up. He could not look up. That evening, I watched them leave. Lydia looked glittering and triumphant. Brandon looked bored, tugging at his tie. Dad looked resigned. They piled into the car, the headlights sweeping across the snow-covered lawn, and then they were gone. The house was silent. The silence was heavy, oppressive. It felt like the walls were leaning in to crush me. I went into the living room and turned on the old television set. The reception was grainy. I sat on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, eating a bowl of cereal because Lydia had not left any dinner. On the screen, thousands of people were gathering in Times Square. They were laughing, kissing, wearing silly hats. They were alive. They were together. I sat there in the dark, watching the world celebrate without me. I realized then that I was not just a member of the family who was treated poorly. I was not a member of the family at all. I was a utility. I was a servant. I was the backdrop against which they projected their happy, successful lives. Lydia's voice echoed in my head, a compilation of all the little cuts over the years. "Confrontation is so unbecoming of a lady, Madeline. You should be grateful we keep you, considering how expensive life is. Girls are meant to be the support system, not the star." I looked at the glowing ball on the TV screen as the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. I looked at my hands. They were rough from handling lumber and cold metal. They were working hands. 7, 6, 5. I thought about the calculator they gave me for Christmas. They thought they were giving me a boring, practical gift. They did not realize they were giving me a tool. 4, 3, 2. I am going to get out of here, I whispered to the empty room. 1. Happy New Year, the TV screamed. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I sat in the darkness of Maple Ridge, Ohio, and I made a pact with myself. I would use everything they gave me, the neglect, the hard work, the isolation, and I would turn it into armor. They wanted me to be a servant? Fine. I would learn how to serve. I would learn logistics. I would learn inventory. I would learn how to manage things better than anyone else. And then I would leave. I would leave this house, this town, and these people, and I would never look back. I did not know then how hard it would be. I did not know about the nights I would spend sleeping in a car, or the hunger, or the fear, but I knew one thing for certain. This was the last New Year's Eve I would ever spend watching someone else's life through a screen. The next morning, when they came home hungover and tired, I had already cleaned the kitchen and shoveled the driveway. Lydia praised me, saying I was such a good little helper. I just nodded. I did not tell them that while they were clinking glasses at the country club. I had been up all night circling dates on a calendar and counting the cash I had hidden in a hollowed-out book under my mattress. I was done being the daughter. I was starting to become the escape artist. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late March. It was a day that smelled of thawing mud and the faint, hopeful scent of early spring. A stark contrast to the gray heaviness that usually blanketed Maple Ridge. I was 18 years old, standing by the mailbox at the end of our driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew the envelope. I had seen it in my dreams for months. It was thick, creamy white, with the logo of the University of Colorado embossed in the corner. I did not open it right there. I tucked it under my shirt, against my skin, terrified that even the air might snatch it away. I waited until I was safe in the bathroom with the fan on and the door locked. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly ripped the letter inside. But there it was. Accepted. A partial scholarship. It was not a full ride. I would still have to work. I would still have to take out loans. But it was a ticket. It was a way out. Colorado was over 1,000 miles away. It had mountains. It had open skies. It had a version of the world where I was not just Thomas Lynn's housekeeper or Lydia's punching bag. For 3 days, I walked on air. I felt invincible. I hid the letter inside an old textbook on the top shelf of my closet, beneath a pile of winter sweaters I rarely wore. I thought I was clever. I thought I was safe. But I forgot the cardinal rule of living with Lydia. Nothing in that house was truly private. Privacy was a privilege, and I was not entitled to privileges. I came home from my shift at the hardware store on a Friday evening. The moment I stepped through the front door, the air felt wrong. It was too still. The television was off. The usual sounds of Brandon playing video games were absent. I walked into the kitchen. My father was sitting at the table, staring into a mug of black coffee. His shoulders hunched as if he were bracing for a blow. He did not look up when I entered. "Dad?" I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Lydia walked in from the living room. She was holding the letter. My breath hitched. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She held the paper by the corner, as if it were something filthy she had found in the gutter. Her face was not red with anger. It was pale, tight, and terrifyingly calm. That was always worse. "So," she said, her voice dropping into the quiet kitchen like a stone into a well, "this is what you have been doing behind our backs." "It is just a college application," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my knees felt like water. "I got a scholarship." "A scholarship," she repeated, tasting the word with disdain. "To Colorado. You are planning to move to Colorado." "I want to get a degree," I said. "I want a career." "And who is going to pay for the rest of it?" she asked, stepping closer. "Because this little piece of paper says partial. That means money. Our money." "I will work," I said quickly. "I will get loans. I'm not asking you for a cent." "You are asking us for everything," she suddenly screamed. the calm mask shattering. You live under this roof. You eat our food. We have supported you for 10 years. Madeline! And the moment you turn 18, you plot to run away? You think you are too good for us? You think you are too good for this family? It is not about being too good, I argued, stepping back until my back hit the refrigerator. It is about my future. I have a right to a life. You have a duty, Lydia yelled. She slammed her hand down on the counter. Who is going to run the store on weekends? Who is going to drive Brandon to practice when I'm busy? Who is going to clean this house? You think you can just abandon your responsibilities because you got some fancy letter? I am not a servant. Lydia, I shouted back. It was the first time I had ever raised my voice to her. I am a daughter. I am supposed to leave. That is what children do. They grow up and they leave. The silence that followed was deafening. Lydia stared at me, her eyes wide with shock that quickly curdled into pure rage. She looked at the letter in her hand, then back at me. You are not going anywhere, she whispered. She raised the letter with both hands. No! I lunged forward, but I was too slow. With a singular, violent motion, she ripped the acceptance letter in half. Then she ripped the halves. The sound of the thick paper tearing was louder than a gunshot in that small kitchen. It was the sound of my mountains crumbling. It was the sound of my exit door slamming shut. Stop it! I screamed, grabbing at her hands. She shoved me back hard. I stumbled and fell against the kitchen table. My father flinched, his coffee splashing over the rim of his mug, but he did not stand up. Thomas, I cried out, turning to him. Dad, stop her, please. That is my future. That is everything I have worked for. Lydia did not stop. She threw the pieces of the letter onto the floor, but she was not done. She marched out of the kitchen and up the stairs. I scrambled up and ran after her, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might vomit. She went into my room, my sanctuary. Lydia, get out! I yelled. She grabbed my suitcase from the closet, the old battered one I had bought at a garage sale for $5, the one I had been secretly packing in my mind for years. She dragged it to the top of the stairs. You want to leave? She shrieked. You want to go so bad? Then go. But do not think you are coming back here to leech off us whenever you fail. She lifted the empty suitcase and hurled it down the stairs. It tumbled end over end, crashing against the banister, the sound echoing through the house like broken bones. It landed at the bottom with a hollow thud. I stood at the top of the stairs, trembling. I felt stripped raw. It was not just about the letter or the suitcase. It was the violence of it, the sheer hatred. She did not just want me to stay. She wanted to break me. She wanted to crush the part of me that dared to dream of something better than Maple Ridge. I looked down at the bottom of the stairs, where my father had finally appeared. He was standing over the broken suitcase. He looked up at us. His face was pale, his eyes darting back and forth between his wife and his daughter. Dad, I whispered. My voice broke. Dad, please, tell her this is wrong. Tell her she cannot do this. This was the moment. This was the turning point in every movie, in every story where the hero is saved. The father steps up. The father protects the child. The father says, Enough. Thomas Lynn looked at Lydia, who was breathing hard, her chest heaving, her eyes daring him to challenge her. Then he looked at me. I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear for me, but fear for himself. Fear of the yelling. Fear of the conflict. Fear of a cold dinner and a colder bed. He walked up the stairs slowly. He did not look at Lydia. He came straight to me. He took my arm, his grip firm but not comforting, and pulled me down the hall, away from the stairs, into the shadows of the linen closet alcove. He leaned in close. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. I thought he was going to apologize. I thought he was going to say, I will fix this. I will get you another copy of the letter. Go pack your bag. Instead, he looked me in the eye, his voice a low, desperate hiss. Keep quiet if you want to stay here. Madeline. The world stopped. I stared at him. I waited for the punchline. I waited for the rest of the sentence. But there was nothing else. What? I breathed. She is upset, he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder at Lydia, who was still fuming by my bedroom door. You provoked her. You know how she gets. Just stop talking. Stop fighting. Keep your head down. If you want a roof over your head, you have to learn to be quiet. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was not dramatic. It was the sound of a very small, very important tether finally breaking. It was the tether that bound me to the idea that I had a father. I looked at this man who had held me when my mother died, this man who had taught me to tie my shoes, and I realized I was looking at a stranger. He was not my protector. He was a hostage who had fallen in love with his captor, and he was willing to sacrifice me to keep his own peace. Keep quiet if you want to stay here, I repeated slowly, testing the words on my tongue. Yes, he said, looking relieved that I seemed to understand. Just let it blow over. We will talk about plans later. Just apologize to her and go help with dinner. He patted my shoulder, a weak, pathetic gesture of affection, and walked away. He walked back down the stairs, stepping over my broken suitcase, and went back to his coffee. I stood there in the hallway. Lydia was watching me, a smug look of victory settling on her face. She waited for the tears. She waited for the screaming. She waited for me to fall apart so she could put me back together in the shape she wanted. A servant, a ghost. But I did not cry. A strange, cold sensation washed over me. It started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. It was like ice water filling my veins. The grief, the anger, the betrayal, it all froze instantly. I realized then, this house is not my home. These people are not my family. I looked at Lydia. I did not glare. I did not scowl. I just looked at her with a face as blank as a fresh sheet of paper. I am sorry, I said. My voice was flat, monotone. Lydia blinked, surprised by the sudden surrender. Well, good. Pick up that mess in the kitchen. Okay, I said. I walked past her. I went downstairs. I picked up my suitcase. One of the wheels was cracked, but it still worked. I put it in the hall closet. Then I went into the kitchen. I got down on my knees and I picked up the pieces of my acceptance letter. I did not try to hide them this time. I gathered every scrap of paper. I put them in my pocket. Then I stood up and started washing the dishes. I washed the plates. I scrubbed the pots. I wiped the counters. I moved with the mechanical precision of a robot. My father watched me from the table, looking relieved. He thought he had won. He thought he had restored order. He had no idea that while my hands were scrubbing grease off a pan, my mind was burning down the house. Keep quiet if you want to stay here. The words looped in my head. They were not a warning anymore. They were instructions. If I want to stay here. But I did not want to stay here. Not anymore. Not for one single second longer than I had to. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I sat on the floor of my room with a roll of clear Scotch tape. I pieced the letter back together. It took me 2 hours. When I was done, the document was scarred and jagged, held together by sticky tape and sheer will, but it was legible. Dear Miss Lynn, congratulations. I stared at it. It looked like me, broken, taped together, but still saying the same thing. I pulled out a notebook. I did not write a diary entry. I wrote a budget. I had $412 in my savings account. The bus ticket to Denver cost $180. That left me with $232. It was not enough. I needed more. I needed to be invisible until I was ready to vanish. The next morning, I went to the hardware store. I told my father I wanted to pick up extra shifts. I told him I wanted to make up for causing trouble. He was thrilled. He gave me a raise, 50 cents an hour. I took it. I took every shift I could get. I worked mornings before school. I worked nights. I worked weekends. I stopped talking at dinner. I stopped arguing with Lydia. When she criticized my hair, I nodded. When she told me to clean Brandon's room, I did it. I became exactly what they wanted, a ghost. But every dollar I earned went into a hollowed-out space inside the vent in my bedroom. Every insult they threw at me was fuel for the engine I was building. I looked at my father differently now. I did not hate him. Hate requires energy, and I needed all my energy for escape. I felt nothing for him. He was just an obstacle, a piece of furniture that could talk. The trauma of that night, the sight of my future being torn apart, the sound of my father's cowardice, did not break me. It calcified me. It turned my soft, hopeful heart into something hard and sharp. I realized that nobody was coming to save me. There was no knight. There was no fairy godmother. There was just me, a roll of tape, and a cracked suitcase. And that was enough. I lay in bed that night, listening to the wind howl outside, rattling the window pane. I touched the taped-up letter on my nightstand. "If you want to live," I whispered to the darkness, answering my father's command with one of my own. "Do not stay here anymore." I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I did not dream of Maple Ridge. I dreamed of a bus moving through the dark, its headlights cutting through the night, driving toward a mountain range that looked like freedom. The Greyhound bus smelled of stale diesel and damp wool. I sat in the very back row, pressing my forehead against the cold glass as the "Welcome to Ohio" sign blurred and vanished behind us in the darkness. I did not cry. I had left my tears in the kitchen sink back in Maple Ridge. In my lap, I clutched my backpack. Inside, tucked into a hidden pocket, was $412. That was my net worth. That was the price of my freedom. Beside me sat the suitcase Lydia had thrown down the stairs. One wheel was still cracked, wobbling frantically every time I dragged it across the pavement, a noisy reminder of where I came from. The ride to Denver took 27 hours. I did not sleep. I watched the American landscape shift from the flat, gray fields of the Midwest to the rolling plains, and finally, to the jagged, awe-inspiring silhouette of the Rockies. When I stepped off the bus at Union Station, the air was thin and crisp. It felt like breathing pure oxygen. It made my head spin. I had no plan, no contacts, and barely enough money for a month of rent if I was lucky. The first year in Denver was not a montage of inspirational music and easy wins. It was a street fight. I found a room in a basement apartment in Aurora, sharing a space the size of a walk-in closet with two other girls. The walls were thin, and the ceiling leaked whenever the people upstairs took a shower. I slept on a mattress I found on the curb, which I scrubbed with bleach for 3 hours before dragging it inside. I attended classes at the university during the day, surviving on coffee and granola bars. At night, I worked. I got a job at a logistics warehouse called Quick Ship. It was a massive, cavernous concrete box near the airport, filled with rows of shelving that stretched up 3 stories high. My job was a picker. I wore steel-toed boots and carried a scanner gun. Beep, walk, lift, box. It was grueling work. My feet bled. My back ached in a way that made me feel 60 years old instead of 19. But I was good at it. I was fast. The discipline Lydia had forced on me, the relentless cleaning, the heavy lifting at the hardware store, had turned my body into a machine. On weekends, when I wasn't studying or picking boxes, I picked up side hustles repairing small engines. I put up flyers at the local laundromat. Washer broken? Dryer stopped? I can fix it for $40. I would show up with my tool belt, and people would look at me, a scrawny college girl, with skepticism. Then I would take their machine apart, replace a belt or solder a connection, and put it back together in 20 minutes. The cash I made from those jobs paid for my textbooks. It paid for my ramen. But the loneliness was a physical weight. The first New Year's Eve away from home, I was alone in the basement apartment. My roommates were out at parties. I did not have money for a ticket to a club, and I did not have anyone to go with. I sat on my mattress, wrapped in a blanket, eating a cup of instant mac and cheese. Through the small, ground-level window, I could see the sky lighting up. Red, green, gold. The fireworks were distant, muffled by the snow and the glass, but they were beautiful. I thought about the Skyloft in Chicago. I did not know it existed then, but I imagined a place high above the world. One day, I whispered to the empty room, one day I will be high enough to see them clearly. It was at the quick ship warehouse that the idea finally hit me. It did not come like a lightning bolt. It came like a headache. I began to notice the waste. The system we used was archaic. It was a patchwork of spreadsheets and legacy software from the 90s that crashed if you looked at it wrong. I watched trucks leave the dock half empty because the dispatch system hadn't updated the inventory in real time. I watched perishable goods rot on the loading dock because a driver got lost and there was no way to reroute him efficiently. It drove me crazy. My brain, wired for survival and efficiency, saw money burning in every corner of that warehouse. Then came the blizzard of 2016. It was a monster storm. Denver was buried under 3 feet of snow. The highways were parking lots. The airport shut down. At the warehouse, it was chaos. We had pallets of emergency blankets, heaters, and non-perishable food meant for relief centers in the mountains. But the dispatch software was blind. It kept assigning routes that were closed by the state patrol. Drivers were calling in, screaming that they were stuck. The managers were running around with clipboards, shouting into radios, completely helpless. I stood there, holding my scanner gun, watching the dysfunction. "It is not a supply problem," I muttered. "It is a data problem." The trucks were there, the goods were there, the roads, some of them, were open, but the system couldn't see the map. It couldn't see the reality. That night, I trudged through the snow to a small, 24-hour diner near the campus to meet 2 people I had been assigned to work with on a computer science project. Maya Ortiz was fierce. She had purple streaks in her hair, wore combat boots, and could code in 3 languages faster than most people could type a sentence in English. She was brilliant, chaotic, and angry at the world in a way that felt familiar. Jordan Blake was the opposite. He was tall, quiet, and wore glasses that were always sliding down his nose. He was a hardware genius. He understood servers and networks the way a surgeon understands anatomy. We sat in a booth with torn vinyl seats, drinking bottomless coffee. "The project is due in 2 weeks, Jordan said, looking at his laptop. "We need an idea." "I have an idea," I said. I pulled out a napkin. I sketched the warehouse. I sketched the trucks. I drew lines connecting them, not based on a static map, but based on live user data. "The logistics systems are dumb," I said. "They assume the world is perfect. They assume the road is open. They assume the driver is on time. We need a system that assumes everything is going to go wrong and adjusts for it instantly. Like a living organism. If a road closes, the system reroutes all 50 trucks in a second. If a warehouse loses power, the inventory shifts to the next closest hub." Maya looked at the napkin. She traced the lines with a finger. Her black nail polish chipped. "Dynamic routing," she said. "Decentralized nodes. We could build that. It is just math." "It is heavy math," Jordan warned. "We would need a lot of processing power." "We write it lean," I said. "We build a prototype, just for one fleet, just to prove it works." That was the birth of Gridline. We did not sleep for the next 10 days. We turned Jordan's tiny apartment into a war room. We ate pizza that tasted like cardboard. We drank enough energy drinks to kill a horse. The air in the room was thick with the heat of 3 laptops running at maximum capacity. I used my knowledge from the warehouse, the specific pain points, the codes, the weight limits. Maya built the engine, Jordan built the interface. We argued. We fought. At one point, Maya threw a stapler at the wall because a line of code wouldn't compile. But we were building something real. For the first time since leaving Maple Ridge, I felt like I belonged. I was not the housekeeper. I was the architect. Then the second blizzard hit. It was 2 weeks later. The city was still recovering from the first one, and now another foot of snow was dumping down. I heard on the radio that a local nonprofit, Denver Warm Hearts, was struggling to get food and blankets to 3 homeless shelters across the city. Their volunteer drivers were getting lost or stuck. They had the supplies, but they couldn't move them. "This is it," I said to Maya and Jordan. "We test it now." We called the director of the nonprofit. I had to talk fast. I had to sound confident, like a CEO, not a 19-year-old student running on caffeine and desperation. "Give us your driver list," I said. "Give us the addresses. Download this app on their phones. We will dispatch them." The director was desperate. She agreed. We set up our command center on Jordan's kitchen table. We had 3 screens going. "System is live," Jordan said, his voice tight. On the screen, little green dots appeared. The drivers. "Road closure on Colfax," Maya called out, typing furiously. "Algorithm is rerouting driver 4. I watched the screen. I saw the green dot pause, then turn. It avoided the red line of traffic and took a side street I knew was clear because I had walked it that morning. "Driver 7 is stuck," Jordan said. "He is spinning his wheels." "Rerouting driver 2 to pick up his load," I commanded. "Split the cargo at the rendezvous point." It was like conducting an orchestra. For 6 hours, we guided 12 vans through a blinding snowstorm. We moved them like chess pieces. We saw the city not as a mess of snow, but as a grid of data points. At 8 o'clock that night, the phone rang. It was the director. "They are all there," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "Every single shelter got their delivery. You guys, I do not know how you did it, but you saved lives tonight." We sat in silence in the apartment. The only sound was the hum of the computer fans. Maya looked at me and grinned. It was a wild, exhausted grin. Jordan took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, letting out a long breath. I looked at the screen, at the web of green lines we had woven across the city. We had created order out of chaos. 2 days later, the local newspaper, the Denver Gazette, ran a story on page 4. The headline read, "Student Trio Saves Supply Chain. Local Tech Helps Charity Beat the Storm." There was a photo of the 3 of us. I looked tired, my hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a frantic expression. But I was there. My name was in print. Madeline Lynn, co-founder. I bought 5 copies of the paper. I sat in my room that night. My hands were trembling. I cut out the article carefully. I thought about mailing it to Maple Ridge. I thought about putting it in an envelope and addressing it to Thomas Lynn. I wanted to say, "Look, I am not quiet. I am loud. I am making noise." I picked up my phone. I stared at my father's contact. I waited. I told myself, they will see it online. Someone will tell them. They will call. I waited for 1 hour, then 2, then a day, then a week. The phone never rang. There was no text from Dad saying, "Proud of you." No message from Lydia saying, "We saw the paper." No jealous note from Brandon. There was just silence. The silence from Maple Ridge was vast and cold, stretching across 1,000 miles. They did not know, or they did not care, or, and this was the most likely truth, they were so wrapped up in their own small, perfect world that the achievements of the daughter they discarded did not even register as a blip on their radar. I looked at the clipping one last time. "Okay," I said. I pinned it to the wall above my desk. The silence did not break me this time. It did not make me feel small. It made me angry. But it was a good anger. It was a cold, hard, clean-burning fuel. If they were not going to clap, I would just have to build a stage so big they couldn't look away. I turned back to my laptop, where the code for Gridline was waiting. "Let's get back to work," I said to the empty room. And I began to type. The transition from a student project to a legitimate company was not glamorous. If you imagine a startup as sleek glass offices and ping-pong tables, you are thinking of the movies. Gridline Response began its life in the corner of a shared industrial workspace in the gritty part of Denver, wedged between a guy welding custom bicycle frames and a woman making organic soap. We paid $400 a month for the space. We slept on beanbag chairs. We ate instant noodles until our blood was probably 30% sodium. Maya, Jordan, and I were ghosts in that building. We coded for 18 hours a day, fueled by cheap energy drinks and the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that we were onto something that could actually change the world. We incorporated under the name Gridline Response. Our mission was simple: optimize disaster logistics in real time. We wanted to be the nervous system for emergency services. For the first 6 months, we scrapped for every inch. We pitched to local fire departments who looked at us like we were children. We begged for meetings with city council members who checked their watches while we spoke. We were too young. We were too unproven. Then came the fire. It was late August. A massive wildfire broke out in the foothills west of Boulder. It moved with terrifying speed, fueled by 60-mile-per-hour winds and drought-dry timber. The standard evacuation routes were choked. The radio frequencies were jammed. It was the exact scenario we had built Gridline to handle. I remember standing in our cramped office, watching the news feed. The smoke was visible from our window, a dark, bruised smear across the western sky. "We have to go there," I said. "We can't just show up," Jordan argued, though he was already packing the server rig. "They will arrest us." "They won't arrest us if we are useful," I said. We drove to the Incident Command Center, a high school gymnasium turned into a war room. It was chaos. Maps were taped to walls, falling down. People were shouting over radios. The incident commander, a gray-haired man named Chief Miller, looked like he hadn't slept in a week. I walked right up to him. I didn't ask for permission. I opened my laptop. "I can show you where every single one of your water tankers is in real time," I said. "And I can tell you which roads will be impassable in 10 minutes based on the wind shift data." He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "Who are you?" "I am the person who can untangle this mess," I said. He gave me 5 minutes. That was all we needed. Maya linked our system to their GPS transponders. Jordan overlaid the wind velocity models. Suddenly, the chaotic whiteboard maps were replaced by a living, breathing digital display on the main projector. We showed them a bottleneck forming on Route 93 before it happened. We rerouted a convoy of evacuees 3 minutes before the flames jumped the highway. For 3 days, we did not leave that gym. We directed helicopters. We managed supply drops. We became the brain of the operation. When the smoke cleared and the fire was contained, Gridline Response was no longer a student project. We were heroes. The contracts followed instantly. Boulder signed us, then Denver, then the state of Colorado. We moved out of the warehouse and into a real office downtown. We hired staff. We were profitable within the first quarter. The recognition came next. Urban Scale, the premier technology magazine, put me on their cover for their 30 Under 30 issue. There I was, Madeline Lynn, wearing a sharp black blazer, arms crossed, looking out at the world with eyes that had seen too much. I bought a copy of the magazine. I looked at my face. I looked strong. I looked successful. I thought about sending it to Maple Ridge. I imagined Lydia picking it up from the mailbox. I imagined her face, but I didn't send it. I realized that sending it would mean I still needed their validation. I didn't want their validation. I wanted their obsolescence. The climax of this phase of my life happened 2 years later, in a glass-walled conference room on the top floor of a skyscraper in New York City. Across the table sat the partners of Northbridge Capital. They were the kind of men who wore suits that cost more than my father's car. They wanted to acquire Gridline Response. They wanted to take our technology global. The lead partner, a man named Sterling, slid a piece of paper across the mahogany table. "We think this is a fair valuation," he said. I looked at the number. $150 million. My share, after taxes and paying out investors, would be enough to buy the entire town of Maple Ridge 10 times over. The room was silent. Maya was kicking me under the table, trying to keep a straight face. Jordan was holding his breath. I looked at the pen in my hand. It was heavy, weighted perfectly. Suddenly, the voice of Thomas Lynn echoed in my ear, as clear as if he were standing next to me. "Keep quiet if you want to stay here." I remembered the girl who was told she was a burden. I remembered the girl who was told she was only good for washing dishes. I remembered the girl who was told to shrink, to hide, to be silent. I looked up at Sterling. I didn't smile. "We accept," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a woman who owned the room. I signed the papers. The scratch of the pen against the contract was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of chains breaking. It was the sound of a heavy door slamming shut on my past and opening onto a future where I would never, ever have to ask anyone for permission to exist. With the sale complete, I didn't go on a spending spree. I didn't buy a yacht or a private island. I did something much more calculated. I established a holding company. I named it Silverline Holdings. It was a nod to the silver lining of a cloud, the light that comes after the storm. Silverline Holdings became my shield and my sword. It was through this company that I purchased the penthouse at the Axis Tower in Chicago. I wanted the skyloft because it was the highest point I could find. I wanted to live in the clouds, far above the dirt and the noise. I wanted a balcony where I could stand and look down at the world that had once tried to crush me. But Silverline had another purpose, one that I kept entirely to myself. I hired a forensic accountant, a sharp woman named Elena, who could find a needle in a haystack of tax returns. I want you to look into the assets of Thomas and Lydia Lynn in Maple Ridge, Ohio, I told her. I want to know everything, their debts, their mortgages, their loans. 2 weeks later, Elena came back with a file. It is not pretty, she said. They are over-leveraged. They took out a second mortgage on the house to pay for the son's college tuition. They have a business loan for the hardware store that is 3 months behind. The local bank is looking to bundle these toxic assets and sell them off to a collection agency. I sat in my office, looking at the numbers. They had spent money they didn't have to maintain the illusion of a perfect life for Brandon. They were drowning, and they were pretending to swim. Buy them, I said. Elena blinked. Buy what? Buy the debt, I said. Silverline Holdings will purchase the mortgage note on the house and the lien on the hardware store. Contact the bank, offer them full value plus 5% to close the deal quietly and immediately. I want the paperwork to show Silverline as the creditor. You want to foreclose on your parents? Elena asked. Her voice hushed. No, I said, leaning back in my chair. I do not want to foreclose. Not yet. I just want to hold the paper. I did not want to kick them out on the street. That would be petty. That would be the kind of thing Lydia would do. I wanted something more profound. I wanted to be the invisible structure that held their life together. I wanted them to sleep in their beds, eat at their table, and watch their TV, completely unaware that the roof over their heads was owned by the daughter they had told to leave. They had used their ownership of the house as a weapon against me. They had used it to silence me. My house, my rules. Now it was my house. But I would be a different kind of landlord. I would be a silent one. I would let them live in their ignorance a little longer. I signed the authorization for the purchase. $180,000 to buy the mortgage, $50,000 for the business loan. It was pocket change compared to the check I had just received from Northbridge Capital. When the confirmation came through that Silverline Holdings was now the legal lien holder of 24 Oak Street, Maple Ridge, Ohio, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was not doing this to destroy them. I was doing this to balance the scales. I was no longer the victim. I was the bank. I stood up and walked to the window of my temporary office in New York. I looked at the skyline. I was ready to go to Chicago. I was ready to build my table. I picked up my phone and called the real estate agent in Chicago. The skyloft, I said. I will take it, cash, and I want the renovations finished by December 1st. I have a party to plan. A party? The agent asked. For the holidays? Yes, I said. For New Year's Eve. It is going to be a family reunion. I hung up the phone. A cold smile touched my lips. They told me to keep quiet if I wanted to stay. Well, I was staying. I was staying everywhere. I was in the software that ran their emergency services. I was in the bank that held their mortgage. I was in the sky above their heads. I had built my balcony. Now, it was time to invite the guests. The key to the lock of the penthouse at the Axis Tower was heavy, a solid piece of brushed steel that felt cold in my palm. When I first stepped inside, it was the middle of December. The space was cavernous, smelling faintly of fresh paint and new lumber. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city of Chicago like a living, breathing mural. From 42 stories up, the cars were just streams of light, and the people were invisible. I moved in with 2 suitcases and a single box of personal items. I did not bring furniture from my old life. I commissioned everything new. I wanted this space to have no memory. I wanted it to be a blank page. The silence here was different from the silence in Maple Ridge. That silence had been a void, a lack of love. This silence was a canvas. It was waiting for me to speak. I kept my ownership of the building buried deep within the shell companies of Silverline Holdings, to the doorman, to the neighbors, and certainly to my family. I was just a tenant. Or perhaps I did not exist at all. I maintained a P.O. box in a modest neighborhood for my mail. I kept my phone number unlisted. I was building a sanctuary, and the first rule of a sanctuary is that you do not let the wolves know where the gate is. But a sanctuary is not meant to be a tomb. It is meant to be shared. The plan for New Year's Eve began with a phone call on a Tuesday evening. It was from my Aunt Caroline, my mother's sister. Caroline had always been kind to me in a hushed, hurried way, slipping me candy bars when Lydia wasn't looking, or squeezing my shoulder at funerals. But she was timid. She was terrified of conflict, and Lydia was nothing if not a walking conflict. Madeline? Her voice was thin over the line. I just wanted to call and see how you're doing. I know it has been a while. I am doing well, Aunt Caroline, I said, looking out at the snow swirling around the spire of the Willis Tower. How is everything in Maple Ridge? Oh, she sighed. Cold, quiet. I suppose you are busy with your work. I heard from your father that you are doing data entry. I smiled. So that was the story Thomas had spun. Data entry, safe, boring, unthreatening. Something like that, I said. Are you getting ready for the big New Year's party at the house? There was a pause. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched between Chicago and Ohio. Well, Caroline stammered. Not exactly. Lydia said, she said they are keeping it very small this year. Just the immediate family. She said it is too much work to host everyone. You know how her back acts up. I gripped the phone tighter. Lydia's back only acted up when she wanted to get out of lifting a finger. So you are not going? I asked. No, Caroline said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I will probably just watch a movie. It is fine, really. I am used to it. And what about Grandma Eleanor? I asked. Is Dad picking her up from the care home? The silence this time was heavier. It was the sound of shame. Lydia said the wheelchair is too difficult to maneuver in the snow, Caroline said, her voice trembling. And she thinks Eleanor gets too confused with all the noise. So, no, Grandma is staying at the facility. They are having a little party for the residents at 4 p.m. Rage is a funny thing. When you are young, it feels like fire. When you are older, and you have power, it feels like ice. I felt my blood temperature drop. My grandmother, the woman who had taught my father how to walk, the woman who had given him the down payment for the hardware store 40 years ago, they were leaving her in a facility on New Year's Eve because she was inconvenient, because she didn't fit the aesthetic. I see, I said. So, who is going? Just Brandon, Caroline said. And maybe Brandon's girlfriend. That is it. It was a culling. Over the years, Lydia had systematically pruned the family tree until the only branches left were the ones that shaded her son. She had cut off the weak, the old, the artistic, the poor. She had created a VIP section in a family home. Caroline, I said, do not make plans for New Year's Eve. Why? She asked. Because I am sending a car for you, I said. A car? To where? To Chicago, I said. I am hosting this year. Over the next 48 hours, I turned into an investigator. I didn't just call Caroline. I tracked down everyone. I called my cousin Noah. He was living in a studio apartment in Cleveland, trying to make it as a graphic designer. He hadn't been invited to the Lynn house in 5 years because Lydia told him his tattoos were upsetting to the neighbors. I was just going to order a pizza and sleep, Noah told me, sounding defeated. Family isn't really my thing anymore, Maddie. This isn't family as you know it, I told him. This is the exile's table. Pack a bag. I called Lena, my second cousin. She was a single mother working 2 shifts as a nurse. Lydia had stopped inviting her when her husband left her, implying that divorce was contagious. "I can't afford a trip to Chicago," Lena said tiredly. "I have Kylie. I can't leave her." "Bring Kylie," I said, "and you are not paying for anything. A driver will be at your door at 10 in the morning on the 31st. I called 2 of my old friends from high school, Sarah and Mike, who had stayed in Maple Ridge but were never good enough to be in Brandon's circle. I was assembling a cast of characters who all shared one defining trait. They had been made to feel less than. They had been told, in subtle and overt ways, that they did not belong at the main table. Once the guest list was set, I turned my attention to the stage. I did not want caterers walking around with silver trays of canapés. That felt too stiff, too much like the country club parties Lydia aspired to. I wanted something that felt like a home, but a home raised to the level of art. I contacted the Riverlight Kitchen, one of the most exclusive farm-to-table restaurants in the city. I asked to speak to their head chef, Marcus. "I don't usually do private events," Marcus said when he came to the loft to see the space. He was a big man with scarred hands and kind eyes. "This isn't an event," I told him. "This is a statement. I want food that tastes like comfort, but looks like a masterpiece. I want roast chicken, but the best roast chicken anyone has ever tasted. I want root vegetables. I want bread that is still warm. I want it to feel like the Sunday dinner nobody ever actually gets to have." Marcus looked at me. Then he looked at the view. "You are trying to fix something with this meal, aren't you?" "I am trying to build something," I corrected. We designed the menu together. It was earthy, rich, and unpretentious. Braised short ribs with red wine reduction, truffle mashed potatoes, roasted winter squash with honey and thyme, a dark chocolate tart with sea salt. Then came the furniture. The dining area of the skyloft was a long, rectangular space bordered on 2 sides by glass. I ordered a custom table. It was 14 feet long, made of a single slab of black walnut with a live edge. It was solid, heavy, and permanent. I bought 12 chairs. They were not matching. They were all different styles, some velvet, some leather, some wood, but they were all unified by a color palette of deep charcoal and slate. I wanted the chairs to represent the guests. Different, unique, but belonging together. When I set the table on the afternoon of the 30th, I did it alone. I placed the white linen runner down the center. I arranged the white hydrangeas and winter berries in low crystal vases so they wouldn't block the view across the table. I placed 50 pillar candles of varying heights along the center. I stood back and looked at it. There was no kids' table. That was the most important detail. In Maple Ridge, there was always a separation. The adults, the important people, sat in the dining room with the good china. The children, the cousins, the unwanted relatives, were relegated to a folding table in the hallway or the kitchen. We were the second tier. Here, there was one table, one level, everyone sat together. Aunt Caroline would sit next to the window. Noah would sit next to me. Kylie, only 10 years old, would have a seat just as grand as everyone else. I walked to the far end of the room, near the entrance where the elevator opened. I set up a small easel. On it, I placed a chalkboard with a simple wooden frame. I picked up a piece of chalk and wrote 2 headers. Leave behind. Carry forward. Beside the easel, I placed a basket of small paper cards and pens, and a small metal fire bowl. It was a ritual I had invented in my head during those lonely years in Denver. I wanted my guests to do more than just eat. I wanted them to purge. I wanted them to write down the things that had been hurting them, the insults, the neglect, the feeling of not being enough, and physically burn them. And then, I wanted them to write down what they were taking into the new year. As the sun began to set on the day before New Year's Eve, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, I stood at the head of the table. I looked at the empty chairs. I mentally placed my father in the room. I imagined Thomas Lynn sitting there, uncomfortable, checking his watch, worrying about what Lydia would think. I imagined Lydia, critiquing the silverware, asking how much the flowers cost, trying to dominate the conversation. I imagined Brandon, looking bored, scrolling on his phone, expecting everyone to ask him about his mediocre job or his new car. And then, with a simple exhale, I erased them. I did not invite them. For the first time in 28 years, I was planning a celebration that did not revolve around managing their emotions. I did not have to worry about Lydia's temper. I did not have to worry about Dad's passivity. I did not have to shrink myself to make room for their egos. A profound sense of peace settled over me. It was quiet, like the falling snow. I had spent so much of my life trying to earn a seat at their table. I had tried to be useful. I had tried to be successful. I had tried to be good, and it was never enough. Now, looking at this 14-foot slab of walnut, with the Chicago skyline twinkling like a galaxy behind it, I realized the truth. The prize was not getting a seat at their table. The prize was realizing I never needed it. I touched the back of the chair reserved for Grandma Eleanor. "We are ready for you," I whispered. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the logistics coordinator I had hired to manage the transport for Grandma. "Ms. Lynn," the voice said, "we have secured the medical transport. We will be picking up your grandmother at 10 in the morning." The facility director was a bit surprised, said her son usually handles arrangements, but we showed them the power of attorney documentation you prepared. "Did you call my father?" I asked. "As you instructed, we did not. We told the facility that this was a surprise outing arranged by her granddaughter." "Good," I said. "Keep it that way." "And the others?" "The black cars are dispatched," the coordinator confirmed. "Everyone will arrive at the Axis Tower by 5 in the afternoon tomorrow." "Thank you," I said. I hung up. I poured myself a glass of water and walked out onto the balcony. The wind was fierce, but I didn't feel the cold. Tomorrow, the leftovers were coming to the castle. Tomorrow. The people who had been edited out of the family portrait were going to paint a new one. I looked down at the city. Somewhere down there, people were rushing to buy champagne and party hats. Somewhere in Ohio. Lydia was probably telling Brandon that they were better off without the clutter of the extended family. She thought she had cleared the deck. She thought she had won by subtraction. She didn't know that I had mastered the art of addition. I turned back to the room, the candles flickering in the reflection of the glass. The stage was set. The script was written, and for the first time in the history of the Lynn family, the ending wasn't going to be a tragedy of silence. It was going to be a triumph of noise. The afternoon of the 31st of December descended upon Chicago with a soft, hush-inducing snowfall. From the 42nd floor, the city did not look like the grinding industrial machine I had known in my youth, nor the frenetic grid of commerce I navigated as a CEO. It looked like a snow globe that someone had gently shaken and set down to rest. The flakes were large and heavy, sticking to the glass walls of the skyloft, creating a translucent cocoon that separated us from the rest of the world. Inside, the air was rich with scents that I had only ever associated with other people's families. The smell of roasting rosemary, the deep, savory aroma of braising beef, and the sharp, sweet tang of caramelized onions drifted from the open kitchen. Chef Marcus and his two sous chefs were moving with a quiet, balletic efficiency. There was no clanging of pots, no shouting, just the rhythmic chop of knives and the sizzle of pans. I stood by the kitchen island, wearing a dress of deep midnight blue velvet. It was soft, comfortable, and devoid of the sharp armor I usually wore to board meetings. I was not a businesswoman tonight. I was a hostess. I was a granddaughter. I was a niece. At 5 o'clock, the elevator chimed. My heart did not race with anxiety, which was a new sensation. Usually, family gatherings were a minefield where I had to watch every step. But tonight, I had laid the mines, and I had already disarmed them. The doors slid open. Aunt Caroline was the first to step out. She was wearing her good wool coat, the one she had owned for 10 years, and she was clutching a bottle of wine like a lifeline. Behind her was my cousin Lena, holding the hand of her 10-year-old daughter, Kylie. They took 2 steps into the foyer and stopped. I watched their eyes. I saw them travel from the polished concrete floors to the 20-foot ceilings, and then to the wall of glass that framed the winter storm. I saw Caroline's hand fly to her mouth. I saw Lena's grip on Kylie's hand tighten, not in fear, but in sheer disbelief. "Madeline," Caroline whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the large space. Are we in the right place?" "You are in the right place," I said, walking over to them. I hugged Caroline. She felt fragile in my arms, smelling of cold air and drugstore perfume. She hugged me back with a ferocity that surprised me. "It is beautiful," she said, pulling back to look at me, her eyes already wet. "It is the most beautiful place I've ever seen. And you live here? By yourself?" "I do," I said. "But tonight, it is ours." Lena stepped forward. She looked tired. The shadows under her eyes told the story of double shifts and single motherhood, but when she looked at the view, the tiredness seemed to lift, replaced by a childlike wonder. "Look, Mom," Kylie said, pointing at the lights of the cars far below. "They look like ants." "They do, baby," Lena said softly. She looked at me. "Thank you for sending the car, Maddie. I do not think my Honda would have made it through the snow." "You never have to worry about how you get to me," I said. "I will always make sure there is a way." The elevator chimed again. This was the moment I had been waiting for. 2 uniformed medical transport attendants wheeled Grandma Eleanor out. She was wrapped in a thick cashmere blanket I had sent to the facility the day before. Her silver hair was brushed to a shine, and she was wearing a touch of lipstick, a shade of soft pink that I remembered from my childhood. She looked small in the chair, but her eyes were alert. They darted around the room, taking in the candles, the flowers, the warmth. Then they found me. I dropped to my knees instantly, ignoring the expensive velvet of my dress, so that I could be eye level with her. "Hi, Grandma," I said, taking her hands. Her skin was paper thin and cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Madeline," she rasped. She looked over my shoulder at the apartment. "Is this heaven? Did I die in the van?" I laughed, and the sound felt loose and real in my chest. "No, Grandma, you are very much alive. You are in Chicago." She squeezed my hand. "Lydia said you were working in a basement. She said you were struggling." "Lydia was mistaken," I said gently. "I am doing just fine." "Just fine," she repeated, looking at the crystal chandelier above the dining table. "Yes, I would say so." Over the next hour, the rest of the guests arrived. Noah came in with his guitar case, looking sheepish until I handed him a glass of aged bourbon and told him I liked his new tattoo. Sarah and Mike, my friends from high school who had been made to feel like trash by Brandon's clique, arrived with wide eyes and nervous smiles that quickly melted into genuine relaxation. The atmosphere in the room was unique. It was not the boisterous, performative happiness of the parties back in Maple Ridge, where everyone was trying to impress everyone else. This was a quiet, deep exhale. It was the feeling of people who had been holding their breath for years finally letting it go. When dinner was served, we moved to the long walnut table. I watched them hesitate. In Maple Ridge, there was a hierarchy. The head of the table was for Thomas. The right hand was for Lydia. Brandon sat next to her. The rest of us filled in the gaps. "Where do you want us?" Noah asked, hovering by a chair. "Anywhere," I said. "There are no assigned seats. There is no kids' table. There is no VIP section. Every chair is the best seat in the house." We sat down. Grandma Eleanor was wheeled to the head of the table, not because she demanded it, but because we all instinctively made space for her. I sat in the middle, between Kylie and Aunt Caroline. As the servers brought out the platters of food, steaming roast chicken with crispy skin, bowls of truffle mashed potatoes that smelled like the earth after rain, roasted root vegetables glazed in honey, a silence fell over the table. It was the silence of appreciation. "This isn't potluck," Lena joked, picking up a heavy silver fork. "No," I said, raising my glass. "It is not." I looked around the table. I looked at the faces of the people who had been edited out of my family's narrative. Caroline, who was too sad. Noah, who was too weird. Lena, who was too poor. Grandma, who was too old. "I want to propose a toast," I said. They all turned to me. The candlelight reflected in their eyes, making them shine. "For a long time," I began, my voice steady, "we were told that we had to be quiet to stay. We were told that our value was based on how well we served the people who were louder than us. We were told that if we didn't fit the picture, we would be cropped out." I paused, looking at the snow swirling outside the glass. "I built a new frame," I said. "I built a new table. And at this table, you do not have to earn your seat. You do not have to be perfect. You just have to be here. To the family we choose." "To the family we choose," Noah echoed, raising his glass. "To being loud," Aunt Caroline added, causing everyone to laugh. The dinner was magical. It was not stiff. Food was passed across the table. Stories were told. Real stories. Not the sanitized versions we used to tell to keep Lydia from rolling her eyes. Noah talked about his art. Lena talked about the funny things her patients said under anesthesia. Grandma Eleanor told a story about my grandfather that I had never heard, about how he used to sneak out of the house to dance in the barn. We were stitching ourselves back together. When the plates were cleared and the chocolate tart was served, I stood up and walked to the easel I had set up near the window. "I have one more thing for us to do," I said. I explained the concept of the leave behind and carry forward cards. "It is a fire bowl," I said, pointing to the small metal basin on a stone pedestal. "It is safe. I want you to write down the thing that hurt you the most this year, the thing you are holding on to that is heavy, and then we are going to burn it." There was a moment of hesitation, and then Noah stood up. He walked over, took a card, and wrote furiously. He folded it, lit the corner with a long match, and dropped it into the bowl. "Insecurity," he said aloud as the paper curled into ash. That broke the dam. Aunt Caroline went next. She wrote for a long time. When she dropped her card in, she whispered, "Loneliness." Lena wrote, "The fear of not being enough for my daughter." Kylie, bless her heart, wrote, "Math homework," which made us all roar with laughter. Then it was my turn. I took the card. I thought about writing Lydia or Dad, but that gave them too much power. Instead, I wrote a single sentence, the belief that I have to apologize for my success. I watched it burn. The smoke was thin and gray, rising up to the ventilation system, carrying the weight of our past away. Finally, we brought the bowl to Grandma Eleanor. Her hands were shaking too much to write, so she whispered to me, and I wrote for her. Being forgotten. I lit the paper for her. We watched it turn to ash together. When the flame went out, she reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was iron tight. "Madeline," she said. Her voice was thick with tears. "You did not just give us a dinner. You gave us back our dignity. You just gave New Year back to the family." I felt a tear slide down my own cheek. I didn't wipe it away. "We are the family, Grandma," I said. "We are the ones who stayed." The mood shifted as midnight approached. The heavy emotional release gave way to a light, buzzing excitement. The fire bowl was put away. The champagne was poured. 15 minutes to midnight," Noah shouted, checking his phone. "Let's go to the balcony," I said. "I have heaters out there. It is cold, but the view is worth it." We grabbed our coats. I wrapped Grandma in another blanket and we pushed her wheelchair to the threshold of the sliding glass doors. The wind had died down, leaving the air crisp and biting. The snow had stopped, and the clouds had broken, revealing a stark, cold moon. Below us, the city of Chicago was a sea of anticipation. We could see the crowds gathering at Navy Pier, tiny dots of humanity huddled together. We stood on the balcony, a cluster of outcasts on top of the world. Kylie pulled out her phone. She was 10. So naturally, she needed to document this. She started filming a video for her story. She panned the camera across the skyline, catching the glittering lights of the skyscrapers, Happy New Year, she chirped into the phone. We are at Cousin Maddie's skyloft. It is literally in the clouds. She turned the camera to show the group. She caught Noah making a peace sign. She caught Aunt Caroline laughing, holding a glass of champagne, looking younger than she had in decades. She caught Grandma Eleanor smiling, looking like a queen on her throne. And finally, she turned the camera to me. I was leaning against the glass railing, the wind catching the hem of my velvet dress. I looked at the camera and smiled. It wasn't the polite, guarded smile I used in magazine shoots. It was a real smile. It was the smile of a woman who had built her own fortress. "Say hi to the family," Kylie giggled. "Hi," I said simply. Kylie hit post. She had no idea what she had just done. She had no idea that she had just lit a fuse that would burn all the way to Ohio. She was just a kid posting a cool video. But I knew, as I looked at her phone, seeing the uploaded notification, I felt a dark, satisfying thrill coil in my stomach. Let them see. Let Thomas and Lydia and Brandon sit in their silent living room in Maple Ridge. Let them look at their phones. Let them see the people they discarded standing on top of the world, drinking vintage champagne, bathed in the light of success. Let them see that while they were busy guarding the door to keep us out, we had gone and bought the whole building. 1 minute, Noah yelled. We huddled closer together. I put my arm around Aunt Caroline. Lena leaned her head on my shoulder. I kept one hand on Grandma's wheelchair. We were a fortress of warmth against the cold night. 10! The city roared from below, a distant rumble like thunder. 9, we shouted back, our voices lost in the wind. 8! I took a deep breath of the freezing air. It tasted like ozone and victory. 7, 6, 5. I closed my eyes. I saw the girl sitting in the dark with a bowl of cereal. I saw the girl on the bus with the broken suitcase. I saw the girl sleeping on a beanbag chair in a warehouse. You made it, I told her. You can rest now. 4, 3, 2. I opened my eyes. 1. The sky exploded. Great blooms of red and gold fire shattered the darkness above Lake Michigan. The glass of the balcony vibrated with the concussive force. The light washed over us, painting our faces in strobes of color. We were screaming, hugging, kissing cheeks. I watched the fireworks reflect in Grandma Eleanor's eyes. I saw the pure, unadulterated joy on her face. This was my table. This was my balcony. This was my life. And tomorrow, when the smoke cleared, the world, and the people who had told me to keep quiet, would know exactly who Madeline Lynn had become. While the fireworks were fading over Lake Michigan, painting the smoke-filled sky and dissipating shades of sulfur and ash, a very different scene was playing out 300 miles away in Maple Ridge, Ohio. I was not there, obviously. I was busy hugging my grandmother and drinking vintage champagne, but I can reconstruct that night in my father's house with forensic accuracy. I have pieced it together from the time-stamped text messages, the panicked voicemails that followed the next morning, and the reluctant admissions Brandon made later when his ego finally collapsed. The living room at 24 Oak Street was quiet. It was the kind of silence that smells of stale pine needles and unspoken resentments. The television was on, tuned to a generic countdown show where D-list celebrities pretended to be having the time of their lives in Times Square. My father, Thomas, was sitting in his recliner, the one with the worn patch on the armrest where he rubbed his thumb when he was nervous. He was nursing a glass of cheap scotch, staring at the screen but not really seeing it. Lydia was on the sofa, her legs tucked under her. She was wearing a matching cashmere lounge set that cost $300, scrolling through her phone with a bored, rhythmic flick of her thumb. She was waiting for the praise. She had posted a photo of their intimate family evening earlier, a staged shot of 3 crystal glasses and a plate of gourmet cheese, and she was fishing for likes. Brandon was sprawled on the floor, leaning against the coffee table. He was 22 years old, but in that house, he was eternally 12. He was playing a game on his phone, ignoring the ball drop. "Happy New Year," Thomas mumbled as the TV crowd cheered. He raised his glass half-heartedly toward the screen. Happy New Year, Lydia replied without looking up. I hope this year is better for business. The hardware store numbers for December were depressing. We will be fine, Thomas said, the standard lie he had been telling for a decade. We would be better if you had been harder on your suppliers, Lydia snapped. You let people walk all over you, Thomas. That was the vibe. No hugs, no kisses, just a critique of his management style at 12 o'clock and 1 minute in the morning. And then, the phone in Lydia's hand began to vibrate. It was not a single notification. It was a spasm. Buzz, 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 buzz. Lydia frowned. She tapped the screen. Who on earth is messaging me at this hour? She opened Facebook first, her brow furrowed. There were comments on her photo. Not the usual beautiful family or Happy New Year comments. These were questions. Lydia, why aren't you in Chicago? I didn't know Madeline was so successful. The view is incredible. Is that Eleanor? I thought you said she was too sick to travel. Lydia's thumb stopped moving. Her face, usually so composed and mask-like, went slack. What is it? Thomas asked, noticing the shift in her energy. People are talking about Madeline, Lydia said, her voice tight. They are asking about Chicago. Chicago? Brandon looked up from his game. Why would they ask about Chicago? Lydia switched apps. She opened Instagram. She saw the little colorful ring around Kylie's profile picture at the top of her feed. Kylie, my 10-year-old cousin, the daughter of Lena, the woman Lydia had called trashy behind her back for years. Lydia tapped the circle. The video filled her screen. I can only imagine what she saw through her eyes. She saw the floor-to-ceiling glass. She saw the sleek, modern architecture of the skyloft, the kind of design you see in magazines, not in real life. She saw the massive crystal chandelier reflecting the city lights. But mostly, she saw the people. She saw Aunt Caroline, throwing her head back in laughter, holding a flute of gold liquid. She saw Noah, looking cool and artistic, strumming a guitar by the window. She saw Lena and Kylie dancing, and right in the center, looking like the matriarch she was always meant to be, was Grandma Eleanor. She was not in a nursing home bed. She was wrapped in a cashmere blanket, holding a glass of sparkling cider, looking happier than she had been in 20 years. And then the camera panned to me. There I was. Madeline, the girl who cleaned the gutters, the girl who was told to be quiet. I was wearing a dress that cost more than Lydia's car. I was leaning against the railing, looking at the camera with a calm, terrifying confidence. Oh my God, Lydia whispered. The phone shook in her hand. What? Thomas asked, leaning forward. Is she in trouble? She is having a party, Lydia said, her voice rising in pitch. A huge party. Look at this. She shoved the phone at Thomas. Brandon scrambled up and looked over his shoulder. Holy cow, Brandon said, his eyes widening. Is that the Axis Tower? The what? Thomas squinted at the small screen. The Axis Tower, Brandon repeated. I follow a real estate broker on TikTok. That is the Axis Tower. It is the most expensive residential building in the Loop. The penthouses there go for $5, maybe $6 million. Don't be ridiculous, Thomas scoffed, waving his hand. Madeline works in data entry. She probably rented an Airbnb for the night with a bunch of friends to show off. You know how young people are. They split the cost 10 ways to look rich on the internet. Dad, Brandon said, pointing at the screen. Look at the furniture. That is custom. Look at the art. You do not rent an Airbnb that has family photos on the mantle. Lydia snatched the phone back. She zoomed in on the background. She had an eagle eye for domestic details. She saw the chef in the background, a man in a white coat with the Riverlight Kitchen logo on it. That is a private chef, Lydia hissed. And look at the flowers. Those are white orchids. Dozens of them. That arrangement alone cost $2,000. She is wasting her savings, Thomas said, his voice taking on a desperate, pleading tone. She is going to bankrupt herself trying to impress us. I should call her and tell her to be responsible. She is not trying to impress us. Thomas, Lydia snapped, turning on him. Look, We are not there. That was the dagger. It wasn't just that I had money, it was that I was spending it on everyone except them. Then, a notification popped up at the top of the screen. It was from the extended family WhatsApp group, a group Lydia had muted years ago because she found the chatter annoying. New video from cousin Noah. Lydia's finger hovered over it. She didn't want to press it. She knew it was going to hurt, but she couldn't stop herself. She pressed play. The video was shot on a phone, shaky and candid. It showed Grandma Eleanor sitting at the head of the walnut table. The remnants of the feast were visible. The silver platters, the wine bottles. Grandma looked directly into the lens. Her voice was thin but clear. "I just want to say," Grandma said, "that this is the best New Year of my life. For years. I sat in a room waiting for a visit. Tonight, I am sitting at the head of the table. Madeline brought us all together. From now on, this is where the family gathers. This is our new home for the holidays." The video ended. The silence in the living room at Oak Street was total. It was the silence of a vacuum. "She kidnapped my mother," Thomas whispered. "She took her out of the facility without telling me." "She didn't kidnap her, Dad," Brandon said, his voice quiet. She looks happy. She looks lucid." "She is confused," Thomas insisted, standing up, his face flushing red. "Madeline is manipulating her. She is using my mother to get back at me for I do not know what." "For everything," Lydia said. She was staring at the black screen of her phone. Her face was pale. Lydia understood something Thomas did not. Thomas thought this was an emotional tantrum. Lydia realized it was a coup d'etat. She looked around her living room, the beige carpet, the mass-produced art on the walls, the fake fireplace. Suddenly, it all looked cheap. It looked small. For 20 years, Lydia had maintained power by controlling access. She decided who came to dinner. She decided who got gifts. She decided who was family and who was excess. She had used exclusion as a weapon. And now, in one night, I had rendered her weapon useless. I had built a bigger castle, filled it with better food, and invited everyone she had banished. "She is mocking me," Lydia whispered. She invited Caroline. She invited that tattoo artist, Noah. She invited the nurse. She gathered all the failures and put them in a penthouse just to spite me. "It is an Airbnb," Thomas repeated, pacing the room. "I am telling you, it is a rental. She's going to come crawling back to us in a month when the credit card bills hit. You will see. She will be begging for a shift at the hardware store." Brandon shook his head. He walked over to the window and looked out at the dark, snowy street of Maple Ridge. "I checked the property records online just now," he said softly. "What?" Thomas stopped pacing. "I have the Cook County Property app open," Brandon said. "I looked up the penthouse unit at the Axis Tower. It was purchased 2 years ago for $4.2 million, cash." "By whom?" Lydia demanded. "A company called Silverline Holdings," Brandon said. "See?" Thomas exhaled. "A company, not her." "Dad," Brandon said, turning around. "Look at the logo on the napkins in the video. Look at the name of the holding company. Silverline. Madeline's middle name is Silva. Silver, Lynn, Line." The realization hit the room like a physical blow. Lydia sank back into the sofa. She looked physically ill. $4 million, cash. While she was clipping coupons and berating Thomas about the electric bill, the stepdaughter she had treated like a servant was sitting on an empire. "She has been rich for 2 years," Lydia whispered. "And she let us pay for dinner when we went to that Olive Garden last month." "She sat there," Thomas murmured. "She sat there and listened to me lecture her about saving money for a used car." They were not just angry, they were humiliated. They were realizing that for the last 2 years, their superiority had been a hallucination. They had been playing a game where they thought they were the kings and queens, not realizing the board belonged to someone else entirely. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, I was completely unaware of the bomb that had just detonated in Ohio. Or rather, I was actively choosing not to care. I was on the dance floor, or what used to be the living room, We had pushed the couches back. Noah was playing a fast, upbeat rhythm on his guitar, and we had put on a playlist of Motown hits. I was dancing with Kylie. She was standing on my feet, giggling as I spun her around. Aunt Caroline was dancing with a glass of wine in one hand, swaying her hips in a way I had never seen before. Even Grandma Eleanor was tapping her hand on the armrest of her wheelchair in time to the music. A young man named David, a friend of Noah's who was a professional videographer, was moving through the room with a gimbal camera. I had hired him to document the night, ostensibly for a family album. But in the back of my mind, the strategist was always awake. "Get a shot of Grandma laughing," I told David over the music. "Get a shot of everyone at the table toasting. Get the details." I wasn't just capturing memories, I was capturing evidence. I knew my father, I knew Lydia, I knew that tomorrow, when the shock wore off, the narrative spinning would begin. They would say I coerced Grandma. They would say the party was a debauched, unsafe environment. They would say I was unstable. I needed proof. I needed high-definition, 4K video proof that this was a night of love, safety, and genuine connection. I needed proof that Grandma Eleanor was clearer and happier than she had been in their care for a decade. David panned the camera to me. I looked into the lens. I didn't hide. I thought about the text message I had received hours ago. "Don't complicate things." I smiled. I hadn't complicated things. I had simplified them. I had removed the toxic elements and kept the pure ones. It was basic chemistry. Around 1 a.m, the party began to wind down. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a warm, heavy contentment. I walked Aunt Caroline to the guest room I had prepared for her. It had Egyptian cotton sheets and a view of the lake. "Maddie," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. She looked sober now, her eyes serious. "You know they are going to be furious, right? Lydia is going to go nuclear." "I know," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Are you ready for it?" she asked. "They can be cruel." I laughed softly. "Aunt Caroline, they were cruel when I was helpless. They were cruel when I had nothing. What can they do to me now? Can they evict me? No. Can they cut me off? I cut them off first. Can they hurt my career? They do not even know what I do." Caroline looked at me with a mixture of awe and sadness. "You have grown so hard, honey." "Not hard," I corrected her. "Reinforced, like steel." I kissed her on the forehead and turned off the light. I walked back out to the main room. The staff was cleaning up silently. The candles had burned low. I picked up my phone for the first time in hours. I saw the notifications. 17 missed calls from Dad, 12 text messages from Lydia, 3 from Brandon. I didn't open them. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I walked over to the window and looked at the reflection of the room behind me. It was empty now, but the warmth remained. I knew that tomorrow morning, the sun would rise, and with it would come the storm from Maple Ridge. They would come with their guilt trips, their accusations, and their demands. But tonight was perfect. I selected the Do Not Disturb icon on my phone. Let them scream into the void. I had a kingdom to run. The sun on the morning of January 1st rose over Lake Michigan like a blade of white-hot iron. It cut through the gray haze of the previous night's storm, reflecting off the water and the glass towers of Chicago with a brilliance that forced you to squint. Inside the penthouse, the mood was lazy and content. The smell of fresh coffee, a dark, expensive roast that I had ground myself, filled the air, mixing with the scent of bacon and maple syrup. My family of leftovers was scattered around the living area. Aunt Caroline was curled up in an armchair with a mug, watching the news. Noah and Lena were sitting on the floor, playing a card game with Kylie. Grandma Eleanor was at the head of the walnut table, buttering a piece of toast with a slow, deliberate hand. It was the most peaceful morning I had experienced in 10 years. I stood by the kitchen island, holding my ceramic cup, watching them. I felt a sense of protective pride so fierce it almost hurt. I had done it. I had pulled them out of the cold and put them in the sun. Then, my phone began to ring. It was sitting on the marble counter, Screen up. The name Dad flashed in bold letters. It vibrated aggressively, dancing slightly across the smooth stone surface. The room went quiet. Noah looked up from his cards. Aunt Caroline lowered her mug. They all knew. They knew the storm had been brewing all night, fueled by social media posts and bruised egos, and now it was making landfall. I picked up the phone. My hand did not shake. My heart rate remained steady at 60 beats per minute. I was not the girl in the hallway anymore. "Good morning," I said. "Are you insane?" My father's voice did not sound like the Thomas Lynn I knew. It was pitched high, trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. He did not say Happy New Year. He did not ask how I was. He just launched the missile. "Good morning to you too, Dad," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Do not play games with me. Madeline!" he shouted. The volume was so loud, I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Do you have any idea what you have done? My phone has been blowing up since midnight. The neighbors are asking questions. My suppliers are texting me. You made us look like fools." "I am not sure I understand," I said calmly. "I had a New Year's Eve party. I invited my family. How does that reflect poorly on you?" "You invited everyone except us," he sputtered. "You made a public spectacle of excluding your parents. And you kidnapped your grandmother. Do you know I could call the police? I could have you arrested for elder abuse and abduction." "Grandma is eating toast," I said. "She seems quite happy, and she is not a prisoner. Dad, she is a free woman who can go where she pleases." "She is senile," he yelled. "She doesn't know where she is. You dragged a confused old woman across state lines just to show off. That is what this is, isn't it? You wanted to rub our noses in it. You wanted to show us your fancy apartment and your expensive champagne." There was a scuffling sound on the other end of the line, and then Lydia's voice pierced the air. It was sharper than my father's, like broken glass. "You are a spiteful, vicious little girl," Lydia hissed. "Hello, Lydia," I said. "Do not speak to me like you are superior," she snapped. "I saw the video. I saw the furniture. I saw the chef. You think money makes you better than us? You think because you married some rich old man or whatever you did to get that place, you can look down on us?" I almost laughed. Of course. She assumed I had married into money. It never occurred to her that I could make it myself. "I did not marry anyone," I said. "I bought this place with my own money. The money I earned building a company you never asked about." "Liar," she spat. "You are trying to divide this family. You have always been jealous of Brandon. You have always been jealous of the happiness we built. So now you turn the rest of the family against us? You fill Caroline's head with lies? You parade Eleanor around like a prop?" I looked at Grandma Eleanor. She had stopped buttering her toast. She was looking at me, her eyes clear and hard. She pointed a shaking finger at the phone, then at the center of the table. She wanted me to put it on speaker. I walked over to the dining table. The room was deathly silent. Aunt Caroline had stood up, looking terrified. Noah looked ready to fight. I placed the phone in the center of the walnut table and tapped the speaker icon. "Lydia," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the room. "I did not divide the family. You did. I just gathered the pieces you threw away." "We never threw anyone away," Thomas shouted from the background. "We are a private family. We like intimate gatherings. You are twisting everything to make yourself the victim." "Intimate," I repeated. "Is that what you call it? When you told me to stay in the kitchen while you ate? When you told Noah he was too embarrassing to be seen? When you put Grandma in a home and visited twice a year?" "We did what was best for everyone," Lydia shrieked. "And you ungrateful brat, we gave you a roof over your head. We fed you. And this is how you repay us? By humiliating us on the internet?" I took a breath. I looked at the view of the city, cold and bright. "I am only doing what you told me to do, Dad," I said. "I never told you to kidnap my mother," Thomas yelled. "No," I said softly. "You told me to keep quiet if I wanted to stay, remember? That night in the hallway. When Lydia threw my suitcase down the stairs? You held my arm and you told me, keep quiet if you want to stay here. There was a pause on the line, a heavy, suffocating silence. I took your advice, I continued. I realized I did not want to stay, so I left, and I stopped being quiet. I built my own house, I built my own table, and I realized that the only reason you wanted me to be quiet was because my voice interrupted the fantasy that you were a good father. You are remembering it wrong. Thomas stammered. His voice lost some of its steam. I was trying to keep the peace. You are being dramatic. You always had a wild imagination. He is lying. The voice did not come from me. It came from the head of the table. Grandma Eleanor leaned forward. She stared at the phone as if it were a snake. Her voice was not the weak, confused rasp they expected. It was the voice of the woman who had raised 3 children during a recession. It was deep, gravelly, and shaking with a decade of suppressed rage. "Mother?" Thomas asked. He sounded small. "I am here, Thomas," Grandma said. "And I am not confused. I know exactly where I am. I am in Chicago. I am eating the best breakfast I have had in 15 years, and I am listening to my son lie to his daughter." "Mom, you do not understand," Thomas started, his good son voice kicking in. "Madeline has manipulated you. She is trying to make us look bad. You made yourself look bad." "Thomas," Grandma snapped, "for 10 years you have left me in that room. You told me it was because I needed special care. You told me the house was too small for my wheelchair, but I saw the photos. You renovated the kitchen. You bought Lydia a new car. But you couldn't build a ramp for your own mother?" "It is complicated, Eleanor," Lydia interjected, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We have so many expenses with Brandon's education." "Oh, shut up, Lydia," Grandma said. Aunt Caroline gasped. Noah covered his mouth to hide a grin. I had never heard Grandma speak to Lydia like that, ever. "I may be old," Grandma continued, gaining strength with every word, "but I am not blind. I watched you. I watched you push everyone away. You pushed Caroline away because she was sad after her divorce, and you didn't want sadness ruining your parties. You pushed Noah away because he didn't wear a tie. You pushed Lena away because she didn't have money." "That is not true," Lydia screamed. "It is true." Grandma banged her fist on the table. The silverware rattled. "You pruned this family like it was a bush in your garden. You cut off everything that wasn't Brandon. You wanted everything for him. You wanted the house for him. You wanted the money for him. And you treated Madeline like a servant in her own home." "We treated her like a daughter," Thomas protested. "You treated her like a mistake you were trying to hide," Grandma roared. "I saw it. I stayed quiet because I was afraid you would stop visiting me altogether if I spoke up. I was afraid of dying alone. So I let you bully me. I let you tell me I was too sick to come to Christmas. I let you tell me I was too tired for New Year's." She took a ragged breath. I reached out and put my hand on her shoulder. She covered my hand with hers. "But last night," Grandma said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I looked around this table. I saw Caroline laughing. I saw Madeline standing tall. And I realized that the problem wasn't us. The problem was you. You are the rot. Thomas, you and your wife. You are the reason this family died." "How dare you," Lydia whispered, "after everything I have done for you." "You have done nothing for me but wait for me to die so you can sell my house," Grandma shot back. "Well, guess what? I am not dead yet, and I am not coming back to that nursing home to sit and stare at the wall while you play pretend with your perfect little life." "You have to come back," Thomas shouted. "I have power of attorney. I am your legal guardian." "Actually," I said, stepping in, "you might want to check your email. Dad?" "What?" Thomas asked. "I had my lawyers review the guardianship papers last week," I said calmly. "There were significant irregularities in how you filed the renewal last year, and considering the documented neglect, visitation logs show you visited her 3 times in 12 months, we filed an emergency motion yesterday morning in Cook County Court to transfer temporary guardianship to me. Pending a hearing, it was granted." You sued me?" Thomas sounded like he was choking. I protected her, I said. Grandma is staying here. I have a guest suite for her. I have hired 2 full-time nurses who will live in the staff quarters. She will live the rest of her life looking at the lake, eating fresh food, and being visited by family whenever they want, not just when it suits Lydia's schedule. You can't do this, Lydia shrieked. You are stealing her. You are stealing our reputation. Everyone in Maple Ridge is going to think we are monsters. If the shoe fits, Lydia, I said. You are manipulated, Lydia screamed. You are all manipulated. Madeline is buying you. She is buying your love with her dirty money. She is a snake. She is a liar. I am done listening, I said. Do not you hang up on me, my father yelled. Madeline, I am your father. You owe me. You owe me everything. I owe you silence, I said. That is what you asked for. That is the only currency you ever valued from me. Madeline! I am going to hang up now, I said, my voice cool and final. I am going to finish my coffee. I am going to spend the day with my family. Do not call this number again. Do not come to this building. The security is very expensive, and they are very efficient. Madeline, wait. If you ever want to speak to me again, I said, leaning closer to the phone, you will call when you are ready to listen. You will call when you are ready to take responsibility. But as long as you want to blame me for the reality you created, I have nothing to say to you. Madeline, please, the neighbors. Happy New Year, Dad. I tapped the red button. The connection severed. The screaming stopped. The silence that rushed back into the room was not empty. It was vibrant. It was the silence of a heavy weight being dropped after a 20-mile march. I looked up. Aunt Caroline was crying, but she was smiling. She clapped her hand over her mouth and let out a sob that sounded like a laugh. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God. Eleanor, I have wanted to say that for 20 years. Grandma Eleanor slumped back in her chair. She looked exhausted, but she looked lighter, 10 years younger. I need more toast, Grandma said gruffly. We all froze for a second, and then the room exploded into laughter. It was hysterical, relief-filled laughter. Noah fell back onto the carpet, howling. Lena wiped her eyes. Kylie didn't understand all the nuances, but she laughed because we were laughing. I picked up my coffee cup. It was still warm. I walked to the window. The city of Chicago was waking up below me. The snowplows were clearing the streets, carving paths through the white. I had just severed the last tether to Maple Ridge. I had just declared war on my father. But as I looked at my reflection in the glass, a woman standing tall, surrounded by the people she loved, I didn't feel like I was at war. I felt like I had just signed a peace treaty with myself. Marcus? I called out toward the kitchen. The chef poked his head out. Yes, Ms. Lynn? Can we get some more toast for Grandma? I asked. And maybe open another bottle of champagne. I think we have something new to celebrate. Right away, he said. I turned back to the room. Grandma was holding court, telling Noah exactly what she really thought of Lydia's casseroles. They were dry and tasteless. The phone on the table remained silent. I knew they wouldn't call back. Not today. They were too stunned. They were currently sitting in the wreckage of their own ego, trying to figure out how the invisible girl had suddenly become the giant. Let them sit. I had a breakfast to eat. It took exactly 7 days for the silence to break. After the explosion of New Year's Day, I did not block their numbers, but I did not answer them either. I let the calls go to voicemail. I let the texts pile up. I needed them to sit in the discomfort of the unknown. I needed them to realize that their access to me was no longer a right. It was a privilege I could revoke at any moment. On January 7th, I sent a single text to the group chat. Dinner, tonight, 7 o'clock. Just the 3 of you. The security desk has your names. I did not ask if they were free. I knew they were free. They were paralyzed by the shift in the universe, waiting for a signal from the new center of gravity. When the elevator doors slid open at 7 o'clock sharp, the winter wind was howling outside, buffeting the glass walls of the Axis Tower. But inside, The apartment was warm. I had changed the atmosphere completely from the party. The massive floral arrangements were gone. The DJ booth was gone. The space was no longer a nightclub. It was a home. I had the lights dimmed low, amber and soft. A jazz record was spinning quietly on the turntable in the corner. Thomas, Lydia, and Brandon stepped out. They looked small. That was my first thought. In the hallway of my childhood home, they had always seemed like giants, looming over me with their judgments and their demands. Here, against the backdrop of the Chicago skyline and the 20-foot ceilings, they looked like tourists who had lost their map. My father was wearing a suit, but it looked tired. Lydia was wearing a stiff dress and clutching her purse with white knuckles. Brandon looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "Come in," I said. I was standing by the kitchen island, pouring wine into a decanter. "Shoes off, please. The floors are heated." They complied silently. It was a small command, but it set the tone. This was my domain. They walked into the living area, their eyes darting around. They were looking for the cracks. They were looking for the evidence that this was all a facade, a rental, a house of cards. They touched the back of the Italian leather sofa. They glanced at the original oil painting hanging above the fireplace. We sat at the smaller, round table near the kitchen. It was intimate, unavoidable. The dinner was simple. I had given Chef Marcus the night off. I had cooked it myself, roasted chicken, wild rice, and glazed carrots. It was the kind of meal I used to make for them on Tuesday nights in high school, when Lydia was too exhausted to cook. The smell seemed to trigger a visceral memory in the room. For the first 10 minutes, the only sound was the clinking of silverware against porcelain. Finally, my father cleared his throat. He looked around the room, his eyes landing on the darkened window where the city lights stretched out to infinity. "So," he said, his voice trying for a casual, fatherly tone, but cracking slightly, "this is quite a place. Madeline, very modern." "Thank you," I said, taking a sip of wine. "Rent must be astronomical in a building like this," Lydia said. She did not look at me. She was cutting her chicken with surgical precision. "I heard these corporate apartments can run $10,000 a month. I hope you are not burning through your savings just to make a point." There it was, the face-saving maneuver. If I was renting, then this was temporary. If this was temporary, then the status quo could eventually return. I set my fork down. I dabbed my mouth with the linen napkin. "I do not pay rent, Lydia," I said. "I own the unit, and as of last year, my holding company owns the building." Lydia's knife screeched against the plate. Brandon choked on his water. Thomas just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "The building?" Thomas whispered. "The whole tower?" "It was a distressed asset," I said, shrugging slightly. "The previous developers over-leveraged. I picked it up for a fair price." "But how?" Brandon asked. He looked at me with a mix of jealousy and genuine awe. "Dad said you were doing data entry in Denver. He said you were barely making ends meet." "Dad saw what he wanted to see," I said, looking at Thomas. He flinched. "I started a company called Gridline Response," I told them. I kept it brief. I did not dramatize it. I told them about the warehouse. I told them about the code. I told them about the fire in Boulder and the buyout from Northbridge Capital. I spoke in numbers: 150 million, 20% equity, 4% annual yield. I spoke the language they respected: money. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. They realized that while they were pitying me, while they were excluding me to protect their image, I had been outrunning them in a race they didn't even know was happening. Thomas put his hands on the table. He looked old. The bluster he had shown on the phone was gone. "I didn't know," he said softly. "Madeline, I didn't know." "You didn't ask," I said. "I thought—" He took a shaky breath. "I thought you didn't need us. You were always so independent, even when you were little. You never cried. You never asked for help. I told myself, Madeline is tough. She can handle the basement. She can handle the work. I convinced myself that I was making you strong." He looked up at me, and his eyes were wet. "But that is a lie," he admitted. "I wasn't making you strong. I was making myself comfortable. It was easier to let Lydia run things than to fight for you. It was easier to ignore you than to protect you. I am sorry." It was the first time in 28 years that Thomas Lynn had apologized to me without a "but" attached to it. I nodded. I accepted it. It didn't fix the past, but it acknowledged the present. "I was a jerk," Brandon said suddenly. We all turned to him. "I saw the comments on TikTok," Brandon said, looking at his plate. "People were roasting me, calling me the golden child, calling me a leech. And I wanted to get mad. I wanted to fight them. But then I looked around the house, and I realized I am 22, and I have never paid a bill in my life. You were working 2 jobs when you were my age." He looked at me. "You didn't get lucky, Maddie. You just worked harder than us." I felt a tightness in my chest loosen. This was all I had wanted. Not the money, not the penthouse, just the truth. But there was one person at the table who was not eating. One person whose face had hardened into a mask of stone. Lydia placed her silverware down. She took a sip of wine. She looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. She saw her husband folding. She saw her son defecting. She knew she was losing control. And Lydia did not do well with losing control. "Well," she said, her voice brittle, "it is a nice story. Madeline, very inspiring. But let us be honest about one thing." "And what is that?" I asked. "You would never have achieved any of this if it weren't for me," she said. The room went dead silent. Thomas looked at her in horror. "Lydia, what are you doing?" "It is the truth," she snapped, turning to him. "If I had coddled her like you wanted, if I had let her be weak, she would never have developed that drive. I gave her structure. I gave her discipline. I was the villain she needed to push against. So, in a way, you owe me. Madeline, my strictness made you a millionaire. You should be thanking me." It was breathtaking. The level of delusion was truly, magnificently pathological. She was trying to rewrite history in real time, turning her cruelty into a strategic parenting decision. I looked at her. I did not get angry. I did not scream. I simply reached under the table and pulled out a manila folder. I placed it gently on the table between the roast chicken and the wine. "Open it," I said. Lydia stared at the folder. She hesitated. Then, with a scoff, she flipped it open. Her eyes scanned the document on top. It was a transfer of lien notification. "What is this?" she whispered. "That," I said, leaning back in my chair, "is the mortgage on the house at 24 Oak Street, and the one underneath it is the business loan for Lynn's Hardware, and the one under that is the financing agreement for your Mercedes." Lydia's hands began to shake. She dropped the paper. You bought our debt?" Thomas asked, his face draining of color. "I did," I said. "Silverline Holdings acquired the portfolio from your bank 3 months ago. You were 90 days behind on the hardware store loan. Dad, the bank was getting ready to foreclose. I stopped them." Lydia looked up at me. There was fear in her eyes now. Real, primal fear. She was imagining the locks being changed. She was imagining her furniture on the curb. She was imagining the humiliation of being evicted by the stepdaughter she had tormented. "Are you going to kick us out?" Brandon asked, his voice small. I looked at them. I looked at the 3 people who had defined my worth for so long. I held their lives in a manila folder. I could crush them. I could do to them exactly what they had done to me. I could tell them to leave. I could tell them they were not wanted. I took a sip of wine. "No," I said. Lydia blinked. "What?" "I am not going to kick you out," I said. "I am not going to foreclose on the store. You can stay in the house. You can keep driving the car." "Why?" Thomas asked. "After everything." "Because I am not you," I said. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. "I do not need to make you homeless to feel powerful," I said, turning back to face them. "I do not need to punish you to feel valid. That is the difference between us. Lydia, you needed to step on me to feel tall. I built my own height. I walked back to the table and rested my hands on the back of my chair. However, I said, my voice hardening, things are going to change. I am the bank now, and as the bank, I have terms. What terms? Lydia asked, her voice trembling. Respect, I said. That is the interest rate. You will treat Grandma Eleanor with respect. She stays here with me, and you will not contest it. You will treat Aunt Caroline and Noah and Lena with respect, and you will treat me with respect. I leaned in closer. 10 years ago, Dad, you told me to keep quiet if I wanted to stay, remember? Thomas nodded, shame burning his face. Well, here is my rule, I said. If you want to enter this building, if you want to be part of my life, you do not keep quiet. You speak the truth. You apologize when you are wrong. And you never, ever look down on anyone at my table again. I picked up the folder and closed it. The debt is frozen, I said. As long as you act like family, you have a home. If you go back to being bullies, well, the bank can always change its mind. Lydia looked at the folder, then at me. She swallowed hard. For the first time in her life, she had no comeback. She had no weapon. She was disarmed. Do we understand each other? I asked. Yes, Thomas said. Yes, Madeline, we understand. Good, I said. Now, eat your chicken. It is getting cold. We finished the meal. It was not a joyous reunion. There were no hugs at the end. When they left, they walked to the elevator quietly. Thomas stopped before the doors closed and looked at me. I am proud of you, he said. It was awkward, clumsy, and 20 years too late. But it was true. Good night, Dad, I said. The doors closed. I stood alone in the silence of the skyloft. I looked at the empty table. I looked at the manila folder. I didn't feel triumphant in the way I thought I would. I didn't feel a rush of adrenaline. I felt something better. I felt steady. I had faced the monsters of my past, and I realized they weren't monsters at all. They were just small, scared people who had tried to make me small too, and they had failed. I walked out onto the balcony. The wind had died down. The city was glowing. I thought about the girl who used to watch the fireworks on a staticky TV screen, wishing she could be part of the celebration. I wished I could go back and tell her that she wouldn't just join the party, she would host it. So, here's the truth I want to leave you with. They will try to silence you. They will try to tell you that your voice is too loud, your dreams are too big, and your presence is too inconvenient. They will tell you that if you want to have a roof over your head, you have to shrink. Do not listen to them. If the family tells you to keep quiet to stay, do not stay. Pack your bag. Tape your broken pieces back together. Walk out into the snow. Because I promise you, there is a skyline waiting for you. There is a table where no one has to sit in the corner. And there is a balcony with a view so beautiful it will make you forget every single bad day you ever had. The question is not whether they will give you a seat. The question is, are you brave enough to build your own? Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below. I really want to connect with you all, and if this story moved you, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it.